place I've called home my entire life. It's interesting because I always say that before you have the opportunity to get elected, you have to actually get selected. And so I am conscious of the fact that I stand here not because I am the only person capable of the job, but because there are individuals who recognize that I might have the capacity to send a message, to articulate a vision for what needs to desperately happen in the city that we call home. I always say that it's not about what you've done, but where you come from and the values that are in you. So I want to tell you not what I've done, but who I am. I'm the only child of Verona Mae Greenland. She is a woman that came here from Jamaica by way of London, a woman who literally mortgaged her own happiness to make my life possible. She was an RN, stopped being an RN, became a healthcare administrator, was able to go and get a $25,000 planning grant to open up a federally qualified health center to provide healthcare services for the underinsured and the uninsured back when the Bronx was still burning. And so my entire life has been imbued with a sense of service. My entire life has been imbued with the notion that to whom much is given, much is required. I've seen firsthand the pain and despair. I understand intuitively. Our family vacations were not to Disneyland, but actually to AIDS conferences in Atlantic City. I knew what AIDS was before I knew what sex was. I didn't understand the intricacies, but I understood that people were in pain, people were suffering, and that nobody was hearing their cries. And so I say that only to understand that, we're in a place of worship here, and so you get inspired, but I think of the words of, John 3:14. Understand that notion that, we know that we have passed from death into life because we love the brethren. I look around at the city that I love, a place I spent my entire life, and understand that we are a people in the ravages of death because we have fallen out of love with one another. We have an opportunity in this election to say with one voice that the people of Yonkers should be heard. 24% of the children that live in this city live in poverty. 78% of the children that attend our public schools can't afford lunch. That is not hyperbole, that is the reality that we deal with. We have attorney Mr. Sussman, he's been here, he understands the legacy of racism in our city. But he also understands that for all the progress that we've made, much has remained the same. When this city got sued for segregation in our public schools, over 50% of the students that attend our public schools were Caucasian. Today, our public schools are more segregated than they were when we got sued by the federal government. And so when you look at that legacy and understand how is it possible that we've got 600 children being evacuated from a school because of toxic waste toxic mold just this past week, how is that possible? How is it possible that we're sitting here in a city that is host to Empire Casino, makes more money for the state than Mega Millions and Powerball combined? There are only 8 racinos in the entire state, and it makes more than the next 6 combined. And we can't get the basic resources we need to build the schools that our children deserve. How is that possible? And I submit to you that that is not just happenstance, that it is a design. We understand the legacy of things that have gone wrong in our city and this nation. I tell people often, my father lived through Hurricane Katrina. I remember being a senior at college, trying to focus on not fumbling the football, wondering if my father was dead or alive at Colgate University. And I'll never forget that 2 days after that hurricane, first thing my father told me is that, son, the day the dam burst is never the day you knew it was busted. My government failed me. Right now, the people that represent this great city have failed us. The dam is bursting. And we are threatened to be overrun by a flood of joblessness, a flood of homelessness, a flood of economic despair. Many of you just experienced this 6.25% tax hike that we had here locally. Now that might just seem like numbers, but I promise you those numbers correlate to lives, to living and dying. When you start talking about the fact that the governor came down here and he gave us $8.8 million. He did not. That was your money. At least 4.5 of that $4.5 million out of that $8.8 million was money that was supposed to go to seniors. People living on fixed incomes that woke up and found out that they weren't going to be getting a star rebate this year because they had been sold out, because this state refuses to give the people of Yonkers the resources that we deserve. We've got 7,000 acres of state-owned land here in Westchester County, a state that pays property taxes on 90% of all the land that it owns across this state. And yet here in Westchester, they've decided, for reasons passing understanding, that they're only going to pay taxes on 88 of the 7,000. Do you think that that is a coincidence? I submit to you that it is not. In Yonkers, we have 450 acres of state-owned land. Guess how many they pay property taxes on? That's correct. Not a single parcel. Yonkers is the Cayman Islands for the state of New York, a place to hide their wealth and take the wealth from the people that depend on it. That is what we are dealing with. That is what is happening here in Yonkers for 40 years. When you start talking about the issues that we're dealing with, the issues that we need to confront. You know, we've got a personal income tax that exists literally here and nobody else, nowhere else. You can go on TurboTax today, and the first question they will ask you is, did you at any point in time live in the city of Yonkers? Because if you did, you have to render unto Caesar. Only here. So when you ask yourself, why does Amazon not come to Yonkers? Why would a company like that not come to a city where we have access to every major roadway, where percentage-wise the real estate is cheaper than New York City, where you can actually have a thriving business? Why would they not want to come here? Well, it's because we haven't set the conditions to make them want to come here. That is what we're dealing with. You know, people have asked me, you know, Joe, why would you do this? You know, I've had the awesome opportunity to be a cable news commentator. I got to go on CNN. I've been, you know, beamed into 150 million homes. You know, as my mother keeps reminding me on almost a daily basis now, you know, I must be the only idiot in the history of politics to leave cable news to run for the lower chamber of the state legislature. It's not for money. It's not for power. It's not for glory. You know, I'll tell you right now, you guys might be the first to hear it. I'm telling you right now that you got people living in this city, in this state, don't even have 2 weeks of job security. And we've got people going to Albany with 2 years of job security, doing nothing to secure better outcomes for our lives. And so my pledge right here is to say that an entire year of my salary, $80,000 for this part-time legislature job, I will pledge to nonprofits here in Yonkers. That every month we will distribute that money to the students, to the communities that need that resource. Because I'm telling you right now, it's not about the money. It's about people. People who have been downtrodden. People who simply have no one to hear their cries. And so, like I said, I don't want to get too long-winded, but I do think it is important that we learn a few things. You know, I've been blessed, overly blessed. I had the opportunity to travel this country fighting for clean energy, and also talking about climate change realities. I was a spokesperson for the George Mason Institute, talking about how do we get people that don't believe in these issues to understand that these issues are impacting their lives. When you start talking about people living in poverty, understanding that 30% of their disposable income is sent on paying the electric bill. We've got states across this country where the leading cause of homelessness is not spousal abuse, it's not substance abuse, it's people who literally cannot afford to keep the lights on. We've got federal programs, state programs, where people are literally getting grants to turn around and give that money to private companies. But we haven't made the actual investment that we need to make in public housing to make sure that we just spent $175 million, $185 million here in Yonkers, and we haven't actually assessed whether we're actually building to best practices for next year, for the next 20 years. Because it's always a day late and a dollar short. We're always trying to paper over the issues. You know, and so I submit to people that when we start talking about what's happening in Yonkers, I implore you to hold everybody to the same standard. To ask the question, what is happening here? How did we get here? And who is responsible? Because that's what we're dealing with right now. You know, I understand that it's very difficult right now with this rising tide of tribalism. You know, I call it the white noise. And as I think I said yesterday, the white noise can cause hearing loss. Right? We've got a lot of things going wrong in D.C. But the things that are going wrong in D.C. have nothing to do with what's been going wrong here in Yonkers for 40 years. And so when you start talking about those issues, understand that we have the power to demand that we are treated fairly. We have the power to say, enough with being the fourth largest city in the state that pays more in taxes than the second, third, and fifth combined. And yet we can't even get Central Avenue paved. We've got children learning algebra and decommissioning high school locker rooms with holes in the roof. We've gone from having close to 4,000 kids in after-school sports down to just 800 in the last 5 years, even though we're the fastest growing school district in the entire state outside of New York City. And you want to talk about opioid addiction. You want to talk about why we have kids out here with the highest rate of youth unemployment, 18 to 24 in Westchester County. Why is that right here in Yonkers? I'm telling you, this is not a coincidence. It's happening by design because people have decided that we are not worthy, that I'm not worthy, that my mother is not worthy, that our grandparents are not worthy, that the seniors that call this city home, that have built the fabric of this city are not worthy. I'm telling you, it's changing today. That's what I'm out here fighting for. I went to the Force football game this past weekend, looking at kids that I know are just as talented as I was. But I know those kids aren't going to get the opportunity to go to college and leave debt-free the way I did, because we're not providing them with the platform they need to succeed. Because you can't get a grant or a scholarship or any type of recognition to go on to that level if you're not being provided with freshman teams and junior varsity teams. And so I remind people to ask, what happened to those teams? What happened in the history of Yonkers that led us to not be able to provide those basic services? Examine it, look at it, figure out how we got there. Because people will continue to tell us that there is nothing that we can do. We've gotten into this heavy act of sloganeering. The slogans have to stop because the pain is too much to bear. And so I would just want to leave you with a brief thank you for coming here, for engaging, because we need engagement more than ever. This is the first time we've had a contested state-level seat in this city in 8 years. The apathy of unopposed elections is part of the reason why nothing ever changes. People will try to get through this election as quickly as humanly possible to avoid the conversation about why is it that these things keep happening to us. So you can visit us online. Please reach out to us on my website. We have a place called Talk to Joe. You can reach out and call me anytime you wish. I'm here to answer your questions. Because again, more so than anything, I got in this race to make sure that as a city, we start talking about how we can get the future that we all deserve. Thank you very much. God bless.